to another episode of GovTech Today. I'm Russell Lowery.
And I'm Jen Saha.
And together we're going to try and bridge the gap between .com and .gov. Today we're teeing up a conversation that on a very opaque subject, and that is the California state budget. News reports talk about massive budget deficits, some of the largest by dollar volume. The state legislative analyst predicting a 68, or the governor predicting a $68 billion deficit. How are your .com clients reacting to this? What kinds of questions are you getting?
Yeah, I mean, instant panic, honestly. Like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Where our business is doomed. And that's definitely not the case, right? We still have hundreds of billions of dollars of spending that's happening. And this isn't even the deepest that we've been. But then the next question is like, how did we get here? This, 2 years ago, we had a $55 billion surplus. So now you're telling me we have that much or more of a deficit? And like, why is the legislature saying this number? The governor is saying that number. Like, don't they have a way to figure this out? And why is it so hard to predict?
I may be able to give some insight and help here. One, I've negotiated the budget with the governor and legislative leaders. It was a great privilege. So I've been in the room when those deals were cut and people are trading back and forth and different agency and Department of Finance and governor priorities. The revenue estimate is one of the difficulties because you're making a projection, and California is so heavily dependent on personal income tax revenue, and by far the largest component of that, it tends to be on wealthier Californians, and then you're making a projection about what they're going to do, and some of the same factors that factored into the massive surplus when companies IPO and their stock shoots to the moon, you get a big number. When the IPO market shrinks, those revenues disappear, and that is the actual explanation for the vast majority of the deficit. But there's still political hay to be made. What are some of the reasons you're hearing, or some of the conversation that you're hearing out there about that?
I mean, there's always, is this because companies are fleeing from California? Our population is slightly down over the years. Did all those people take all those revenues with them?
Sure. And those things happen, and I'm not minimizing. Those things happen back and forth in any given year, and California's slowing growth is a genuine story. It's just not I'm not sure it's the explanation for the budget story as much as people might want to tell. I think the budget from a structural standpoint is pretty stable in that. We know that the largest category of spending is going to be education, and then you're going to have health and human services, and you're going to have prisons, and the rest of the budget kind of fills out. There's still enormous opportunity in that for people who are helping the state deliver the services and things that the residents expect. $300 billion plus is still going to be allocated, and ultimately the state's going to partner with the private sector to deliver those services.
Well, and I think you make a really good point when you talk about personal income tax being such a huge portion of our state's revenues. We don't file taxes until April, right? That is right. Like doom or gloom. Tax day comes in April. So even between January, when the governor is constitutionally required to put a budget out there, and April, I mean, a ton can happen to where this number may be something that neither the legislature or the governor has predicted. I mean, I think I heard one of my staff told me just in budget hearings, they were saying January revenues were down $8 billion from where they thought they would be. So those numbers are constantly shifting, right?
That's why we do what's called a May revision. And the governor releases updated projections based on the actuals, and you get more actuals from April. And we did a pretty good job after the last severe deficits in creating a reserve account And there's talk this year about increasing the amount of reserve account, which I think is dramatically is a good thing and a dramatic departure. It was pulling teeth that we helped fight to get that in the first place. So it's great. But the May revision we have the updated revenues. You come together on the best information. But again, because we have a very progressive tax, over 14% for the highest income earners. And those tax filers are the most likely to file extensions
Yep.
and pushing that deadline till October, and then different federal extensions pushed it back and
Right.
back, which makes predicting revenue hard. But we'll have a pretty good ballpark estimate, and this will be largely resolved in the budget year in July. There'll be some tough choices that are being made, and it's important that people who are interested in doing business with the state track those, because I know a lot of the fights, people tend to look, if you watch Fox News or MSNBC and you think the world is the fights between, the Republicans and the Democrats or whatever. In reality, these problem decision makers, they don't have a partisan hat on when they're in the room trying to put together a budget. There's competing priorities, different agencies. We tend to think of it as the administration, but in reality, the administration's talking to budget staff. There are Democrats in the Assembly and the Senate that chair and lead committees, and they don't necessarily have the exact same priorities as the governor. And sometimes the governor's cabinet secretaries or even their departments have different priorities than are laid out by the Department of Finance and captured in the budget. And so how the information gets transferred, the budget staff often have a long and standing relationship. They have private conversations with the bowels of the administration. Sometimes I've been in budget meetings where a department is not singing from the same sheet of music as the administration is at the budget negotiating table. And so discerning and having boots on the ground, listening, doubling down on meetings, helping your champion. If you've got a product and a champion and somebody wants to buy your product, how do you champion that in the budget process? It's totally different when there's a deficit than when there's a surplus. So, and some people are going to be pencils down because they read a headline about a deficit, and some people are going to double down because the opportunity and how do you capitalize on it just looks different.
Well, let me ask you one thing, because you're right. There's lots of how the sausage is made going on here. But from an outsider's perspective, I'm a company that sells to the state, or I'm an analyst working on a project in, whatever department. It's really hard to advanced plan, right? Like, say I have an IT project that's going to take 5 years. I don't know what next year is going to look like. Are we going to have another deficit, another surplus? Like, what's happening? The start and stops of long-term planning, our revenue swings, our budget situation make that incredibly difficult, if not impossible. So what do you think would fix this? What do you think would give people that ease of, we're still going to continue these mission critical projects. Nothing's going to stop. EDD next is still going to happen. We're getting our unemployment system up to speed. Like, what do you think would give them the security to know that the world is not ending if we have another deficit, or if we have a surplus, it's not, heyday, let's throw everything at the state that they could possibly buy?
I think how I think about it is you need, like every sales process with the state, we always have to sell on multiple levels. So if you thought about it from a typical sales process, you might have an interaction at the user level, at the very base, the SSM1 that is going to be hands-on touching the project. And then you've got a layer of the data people, and then maybe you're getting up to the technology officer, and then you've got the agency level. Well, above that agency level, there's the department, there's DGS, Department of Technology, and then above that, you've got the Department of Finance, who all may have a signature or engagement in there, and then you've got the governor office directly. During time of budget certainty, that selling that entire chain becomes especially critical, and not everyone is comfortable going to every level in that chain, and you might need to pull in additional resources in order to stabilize that. And you can do that over multiple years, is one. And then two, sometimes it's providing a service. So when I describe that, having the conversation at the entry level person, sometimes even as high as the upper levels of the department, most state employees may have never met an agency secretary. The director or deputy director title that we kind of take for granted might be somebody's prepping because they may bump into that person in the course of a day. And so I call it, think of it kind of sort of that's Mount Olympus. That's the level of the gods. We're just down here working. We have no idea how that works. Well, if you're able as a vendor to kind of pierce that veil to help them achieve their goal and navigate their ask through the entire level of the bureaucracy from they want it to does the governor care? And can you bridge that gap? Because when it's cutting time, that happens in private conversations and private meetings. You're not necessarily at that table. So you need to figure out a way to be there, and you need even more champions than normal in order to do that. Otherwise, we're waiting,
Right.
and you don't understand. It seems random. It's not random. It's thoughtful. It's intentional. But people also make mistakes. If they knew the consequence of stopping and starting, if they understood that you can save money, and ultimately implementing this is going to generate revenue. Those kind of different sorts of arguments and different pain points that are external to maybe the tech solution that you were pushing, but there are budget implications, and how do you explain those to multiple people in the chain, I think, is the opportunity.
Well, and I think you brought up something earlier that would give me a lot of ease, and it's very similar to our personal lives. So you mentioned budget reserves. They are saving us, right? Like
Right.
this coming fiscal year and maybe the next few fiscal years, like having that reserve and being able to tap into it, just like at home, right? Unexpected stuff comes up. It wasn't a part of my monthly budget. Thank God I have a savings account, right?
Right.
And so sort of emphasizing that in flush times, putting money away. I know Governor Brown was a huge proponent of building up those reserves, and it's serving us well as today. And then so that you do have that sort of safety net to fall back on should you have a tough budget year like we're having right now.
Right. It smooths it out, and it can give some certainty. The uncertainty and the fact that there will be cuts, or that the pace of growth may not be there. Is someone going to underfund a procurement in order to maintain some other service? It could be employees, it could be travel, it could be service delivery to the state. Understanding the mechanics of a department's budget, the pressures that they're under, the mandates that they've been given to cut. I've done things where I found other places in the budget where the department could find savings, or different ways to position products in order to justify an expenditure that is going to resonate sort of up in Mount Olympus in those budget meetings and discussions, where often your champion in the department is not part of that level of conversation. And so how do you help them communicate sort of at the agency, and then there are contests between the governor's cabinet secretary. Why am I bearing this much cut? It's easier for them,
Yep.
that sort of thing. And those disagreements are almost never public, but they're very real. And the competition between agency secretaries and between departments within an agency is very real. And it's not politics that you want to be front and center on as a vendor, but it's something you need to be aware of and needs to be part of your strategy of how you're going to see a procurement through to completion, or even get it initiated and funded in the midst of a deficit. There will be projects that get funded, and it's not random and it's not capricious. It's often thought out, and there's a rationale, even if we don't have the full picture on why that's happening.
Well, for our .com listeners that may be looking to sell to the state, I think the best advice I could give them is to sort of do, and this is what I say to my clients, sort of do what you've always done. Don't lead with, hey, I want to sell you something. Lead with, how can I help you? Because that's what we're going to do at the end of the day, whether they have a deficit and they're trying to fill a hole, or whether they have a surplus and they're looking to start a new program. It's how can we as a vendor community be a great partner in helping them solve the problems that are in front of them. And I think that should be the underlying mission of every vendor, whether we're in a surplus or a deficit, right?
That's a perfect place to end. That's the exact right attitude. This is not a time to put your pencil down. It's a time to double down.
Absolutely.